Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. On a crisp autumn morning in a small town, nestled along the banks of the river, the tranquility was shattered. The picturesque scene was punctuated only by the steady rustle of leaves, vibrant in oranges and golds. But beneath the idyllic surface, something sinister had been unfolded. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the branches, they illuminated the wooden bench at Riverside Park, where Mrs. Ellen Hargrove had been a familiar fixture for over a decade. Known affectionately by locals as the Park Lady, she shared her space with a couple of dogs, enjoying the simple pleasure of watching the world flow by. Her absence on that morning went unnoticed at first. The park wasn't crowded, and routine had a way of dulling the alarm bells. However, concerned friends began to worry when Ellen failed to keep her weekly tradition of baking cookies for the neighborhood children. By noon, whispers evolved into frantic calls. And by early afternoon, a small group of locals convened under the towering oak trees, unease swelling among them. It was one of Ellen's closest friends, Carol, who first suggested they check her house. "She must have had a fall or something," she said, trying to convince herself as much as the others. But as they approached the quaint, weather-beaten cottage that stood just blocks from the park, a sense of foreboding filled the air. The door stood slightly ajar, the limp wind creaking it open as if beckoning them inside. Nothing could prepare them for what lay beyond that threshold. The victim. Inside the cottage, a scene of disarray unfolded. Ellen's usually inviting home seemed to gasp under the weight of chaos. The cushions on her well-loved armchair were strewn about, and family photos that once smiled down from the walls seemed to grimace with concern. Plants stood parched in the morning light, their leaves drooping, waiting for the gentle touch of their caretaker. Elle stepped cautiously over the threshold. A chill gripped her heart. "Ellen, are you here?" she called, her voice trembling with an urgency that echoed painfully in the hushed surroundings. Oddly, there was no response. Only the persistent tick of a clock and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Moving deeper into the home, the faint odor of something spoiled began to permeate the air. It was a smell so out of place, one that seemed foreign to the clean and cheerful atmosphere Ellen had cultivated. The kitchen was a disaster. Dishes piled high in the sink, and remnants of yesterday's dinner lay half-prepared on the countertop. Ellen was meticulous, almost ritualistic, about her routine. This disarray was entirely out of character. As Carol ventured further, her eyes fell upon the doorway leading to the bedroom. It was closed, the door barely able to contain the sense of dread that radiated from within. With a shaky hand, she pushed it open. The moment the door creaked, darkness pooled into the hall, as though the room were a bottomless pit. What she saw next froze her in her tracks. Ellen lay sprawled on the floor, her once vibrant spirit still. The lifeless body, framed by the soft morning light, displayed a serenity that belied the horror of the situation. Though it would be hours before law enforcement arrived, and even longer until answers emerged, one truth lingered like a haunting echo: Ellen Hargrove was gone, and her disappearance would unveil a web of deception twisting through their quiet town. The crime scene. The air in Ellen's bedroom thickened as Carol staggered back, clutching the doorframe for support. Her mind raced, refusing to accept the impossible reality before her. It wasn't until Sheriff Daniels arrived, brown boots scuffing the hardwood floor, and a series of heavy breaths escaping his lips, that the weight of the moment became undeniable. The sheriff's eyes narrowed at the unsettling sight, his experienced instincts kicking in. "Everyone step back," he commanded, his voice steady yet tinged with solemnity. He waved over some officers to section off the area, casting a protective perimeter around the room. There was a calm efficiency to their movements, a practiced choreography born from years on the job. Carol stood outside, grappling with shock, while officers donned gloves and began their meticulous examination of the scene. The initial sweep revealed signs of struggle. Furniture toppled, a shattered picture frame laying askew on the carpet. In stark contrast, Ellen lay motionless, her body unusually still, a stark reminder of life's fragility. "Call for forensics," Daniels ordered, his gaze fixed on the body, taking in every detail. A quick assessment suggested a clean, fatal injury, but much remained a mystery. Beneath Ellen's calm exterior, there might have been a fierce battle. Marks on her arms indicated a struggle, but there were no signs of forced entry. Outside, a small gathering of concerned neighbors had begun to form, drawn by the flashing lights and hushed murmurs. Speculation rippled among them, whispers brushing past lips like a cold wind. Had someone wanted to harm Ellen? Or was it a matter of someone too close? As the afternoon light faded, a feeling of gloom settled over the town. Life would not be the same without her. But one question now lingered heavily in the air: who would want to silence the park lady, and why? The early investigation. The dull thud of footsteps echoed through the small, cramped office of the sheriff's station, where Sheriff Daniels gathered his team around a weathered wooden table. A bulletin board lined with crime scene photographs stood sentinel behind him, casting a grim shadow over the proceedings. Inspector Reyes, a keen-eyed investigator with a sharp mind for detail, was the first to speak. "Ellen Hargrove had no known enemies," she began, her brows knitted in contemplation. "Everyone loved her. She was involved in local charities, hosted book clubs. There's not a soul who'd just up and harm her without a reason." The skepticism hung heavy as her words hung in the air. Daniels nodded, the weight of the case bearing down on him. "Let's start with a complete background check. Family, acquaintance, everyone." Her routine was predictable. Someone could have monitored her and waited for the right moment. Officer Eli Harrison, fresh-faced yet eager, chimed in. She'd been sponsoring children at the community center. Maybe one of them didn't take the help well. The suggestion elicited a few murmurs, and each thought tumbled into a collective well of concern. As the discussions continued, the team sifted through Ellen's belongings, uncovering clues amidst the dust of her last days. They discovered her meticulous Schedule calendar, filled with careful notes and color-coded events. Among them, a cryptic entry from a week prior caught Daniel's eye. Meeting with a friend to talk. Who was she meeting? Daniels pondered, jotting down notes while his mind began to visualize a connection. Let's trace her calls and messages. Hours turned into days, and as each piece of Ellen's life was pulled apart, they came to understand the depths of her relationship. Friends turned to suspects, whispers morphed into accusations, and the town they once cherished with ease became a suspended tapestry of tension. In their search for answers, they knew they were racing against the clock. Each moment spent in uncertainty only thickened the smoke of mystery shrouding Ellen Hargrove's final day. The dead ends. Days turned into a week, and the thrill of discovery was slowly replaced with a relentless cycle of frustration. Sheriff Daniels sat at his desk, staring at a whiteboard speckled with names, dates, and questions that began to bleed into one another. Most of the leads they followed had illuminated nothing more than shadows of doubt. The call logs from Ellen's phone revealed an array of acquaintances, fellow committee members, distant relatives, and the children from the community center, all of whom offered alibis and tearful recollections of Ellen's kindness. One name, however, stood out from the shadows. Mark Sweeney, a recently released convict whose ties to the town were complicated, to say the least. 2 witnesses claimed they saw him loitering by the park on the day of Ellen's death, but he steadfastly denied any involvement. Daniels and Reyes ventured to the local diner where Mark often frequented. The atmosphere buzzed low with conversation, and the smell of fresh coffee hung in the air. Mark sat alone at the counter, his eyes flitting nervously. "Did you know Ellen?" Reyes probed as she slid onto the stool beside him. He flinched, his voice unsteady. "Yeah, she gave me a second chance, tried to help me." Yet a hollow laugh escaped his lips, and a subtle tension crackled between them. This led to a dead-end conversation as questions swirled. But answers remained elusive. Mark claimed he hadn't seen her for weeks, and they had no physical evidence directly linking him to the crime. Meanwhile, the tireless search for the mysterious friend mentioned in Ellen's calendar yielded lackluster results. One after another, old acquaintances were contacted, yet no one could recall any significant meeting. The deeper they dug, the more convoluted Ellen's life seemed, as if she had carefully crafted the very walls meant to shield her from scrutiny. Frustration brewed like a storm in the air. Every promising lead turned cold, every hint a passing breeze. But as the pressure mounted and the days waned, whispers from the underbelly of the town began to raise signals that not everything was as straightforward as it seemed. A sense of impending unraveling lingered, and beneath the surface, buried secrets began to claw their way toward the light. A break in the case. It was a fluke that turned into a breakthrough. As the autumn leaves swirling through the streets of a town plagued by uncertainty, a call came in that turned the tide. Officer Harrison was meticulously reviewing the community center security footage for any sign of Ellen when he spotted something peculiar, a figure loitering near the entrance just days before her demise. Bringing his findings to Sheriff Daniels, they watched the grainy video together, eyes glued to the screen. The timestamp marked a late afternoon, and there stood a young man, no more than 25, scuffed shoes crunching against the gravel. He appeared anxious, glancing at his watch, then fidgeting with something in his pocket. Each repetitive motion echoed a sense of urgency that piqued Daniel's interest. "Do we have a name?" the sheriff asked, leaning closer. Harrison rushed to pull a file. "Meet Jerry Matthews, a kid from the neighborhood. He's had minor run-ins with the law, mostly petty theft, but got into trouble around the community center a few times." Daniel's brow furrowed in concentration. "Did he know Ellen? Did anyone see him interacting with her?" As they began their search across town for Jerry's whereabouts, a familiar anxiety mounted. They could no longer afford to follow shadows. The hunt was on, a search that sent officers through back alleys and local hangouts, Places where whispers and guarded eyes might yield something more than the silence that had cocooned their earlier inquiries. Eventually, Officer Harrison returned with the news they'd awaited. Jerry was apprehended at the bus station, his youthful face marred by undesired tension. He shifted uncomfortably in the back seat of the squad car, glancing nervously around, barely meeting the gaze of the officers around him. Under questioning, Jerry's facade crumbled as he recalled a story of desperation. "I just wanted to talk to her," he stammered, "but I didn't mean." The final words lingered, hanging heavy in the air. Finally, after what felt like a marathon of questions, he confessed, tears streaming down his cheeks. The truth was tumbling forth like a dam burst in Ellen. It had to steer him clear of the path he was on. But in a moment of anger and confusion, he had taken things too far. The revelation sent shockwaves through the room, a tragic spiral birthed from the very kindness Ellen had shown. As details unfolded, revealing a far deeper tale of life, choices, and irreversible action. The suspect. As the cool evening descended, the interrogation room's fluorescent lights flickered dimly, mirroring the uncertainty that hung in the air. Sheriff Daniels leaned over the table, his gaze fixed on Jerry Matthews, who sat slumped in the metal chair, an ocean of regret washing over his youthfully weary face. "Let's start from the beginning, Jerry," Daniels urged, his voice steady but laced with undeniable gravity. "You say you wanted to talk to Ellen. What was it that drove you there? Really?" The young man's eyes darted to the corner, as if searching for an escape. "I was struggling. I wanted help, but I didn't know how to ask for it," he admitted, his voice shaky. "Ellen was always so nice to me, but I was afraid I'd just mess everything up again." "Did she threaten to cut you off from her help?" Reyes interjected, her tone sharp yet understanding, recognizing the play of emotions swirling in the room. Jerry's shoulders tensed and he shook his head rapidly. No. I was thinking about what I'm doing with my life. And I figured if she really cared, I thought she could help me turn it around. I was scared. What happened that day? Daniels pressed, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he was unraveling a tragedy rather than a simple crime. "I went to the park to talk to her," he began, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I flipped. I didn't want to hurt her. Tears streamed down his cheeks. The guilt had taken root deep within. I just lost." As he recounted the chaotic moments that followed, the lines between intent and reaction blurred. Daniels listened closely as Jerry described the pent-up frustration that escalated into a confrontation. But as he detailed the moment he pushed Ellen, the reality of his confession hung heavily. In his moment of desperation, the weight of his actions crashed down on him like a tidal wave. "Afterwards, I didn't know what to do," he continued, his breath hitching as he recalled the horror of what transpired. "I panicked. I didn't mean to, but I took her bag to make it look like a robbery gone wrong." For a heartbeat, the room fell silent, the raw pain of truth weaved through the atmosphere, choking the air. The sheriff's expression hardened, caught between the tragedy of a young life spiraling out of control and the senseless loss of a beloved community member. "Jerry, Daniel said finally, his voice low but unmistakable. Do you understand how much this has cost? You need to take responsibility for what you've done. As Jerry nodded, the gravity of the chain reaction his choices had unleashed settled in. It became clear that this was no longer just about a crime, but rather a life upended, a haunting refrain echoing through the halls of the town they both called home. The realization began to resonate not only within him, but echoed beyond the walls of that small room, reverberating across the community that felt Ellen's absence like a phantom ache. The trial. As the chill of winter crept into the town, the courthouse stood like a fortress of resolve. Silent witnesses to the weight of justice. The trial of Jerry Matthews was set to begin, drawing the attention of townspeople, still grappling with the echoes of Ellen Hargrove's tragic demise. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, anticipation hanging heavy in the air like a low fog. Sheriff Daniel sat in the back, his expression a mix of solemn contemplation and wary anticipation. As the door swung open and the gavel fell, everyone turned their gaze to the defendant Jerry, eyes sunken and hollow. Sat at the front, flanked by his legal team, wearied but resolved. The prosecution wasted no time, painting a vivid picture of the events leading up to Ellen's death. They described her as a beacon of hope, a kind woman who dedicated her life to helping others. Witnesses spoke of Ellen's final acts of charity, and some family members recounted her deep-seated belief in redemption. She'd often thrown lifelines to those in need. Jerry himself. Ellen Hargrove was a source of light in this community, and her light was snuffed out in a moment of senseless violence. The prosecuting attorney declared, his voice resounding through the room, her kindness was met with betrayal, and we must ensure justice is served. In contrast, the defense offered a portrayal of a troubled young man, a victim of his circumstances and his demons. They painted Jerry as a product of a broken system, burdened by the shadows of his past mistakes. They emphasized his remorse, his confession, and how he never intended for things to escalate to such tragic heights. Look at him, Your Honor, the defense attorney pleaded, his voice rising. This is not a monster. This is a frightened boy who acted out of fear and desperation. Let us not forget what led to this tragedy, a plea for help that turned into a nightmare. Jerry's eyes fell to the floor as he listened, shame washing over him anew. The blame he felt was palpable, and he struggled to catch his breath as witnesses took the stand, recounting the impact of Ellen's loss, the rippling devastation that echoed through the community. As the trial unfolded over several tense days, the courtroom's mood swayed like a pendulum. Every testimony elicited quiet tears among the gallery, with Ellen's friends and family struggling to maintain their composure. On the final day, Daniel sat on the edge of his seat, heart pounding steadily as the closing arguments echoed off the walls. Prosecution urged the jury to bring forth a verdict that would hold Jerry accountable for his actions, while the defense appealed to their humanity, urging mercy and understanding. As the jury departed to deliberate, the wait was agonizing. Varying emotions coursed through the crowd. Anguish, anger, and reconciliation danced within the hearts of those gathered. The trial was more than a quest for justice. It was a reckoning, forcing the community to grapple with tragedy and forgiveness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury returned, somber faces telling their own story as they took their seats. The foreman cleared his throat, and the courtroom hushed to a whisper. We find the defendant, Jerry Matthews, guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Gasps filled the room as the weight of the verdict sank in. Relief washed over some. Others struggled with the reality that the boy who had taken Ellen's life was now bound by the consequences of his actions. In the heart of the community, the vision of forgiveness still lingered, but justice had triumphed. A small balm on a wound that would never fully heal. The aftermath. As the gavel struck the final blow, the sounds of the courthouse faded into the distance. But the reverberations of the trial echoed throughout the town long after. Ellen Hargrove's absence felt monumental, an empty space where her laughter once filled the air. With the verdict delivered, conversations shifted from whispers of fear and uncertainty to reflections of mourning and heat. Community gathered for a candlelight vigil in Riverside Park, a solemn tribute to their lost friend. The twinkling lights flickered softly like stars scattered across the night sky, illuminating tear-streaked faces as friends and neighbors shared memories of Ellen, her kindness casting a long shadow over their grief. Ellen was a light in our lives, Carol spoke, her voice quaking yet resolute. She believed in second chances, and we must honor her by carrying forward her legacy. The crowd nodded, the flickering candles their promise to cherish her memory. In the days that followed, a decision began to emerge among the townsfolk, a desire to create something meaningful from the ashes of tragedy. They rallied around the community center where Ellen had volunteered tirelessly, revamping it into a hub for support and empowerment. The Ellen Hargrove Foundation was born, designed to help at-risk youth find paths toward brighter futures, extending the same hope that Ellen had offered to so many. For Jerry Matthews, the sentence served as a stark wake-up call. Behind bars, he often found himself lost in reflection, haunted by the lives he'd impacted with his reckless choices. He began to write, pouring his remorse onto paper and letters to Ellen's family. Each word was a step toward penance, a means to process the reality of what he had stolen from so many a life. A chance, a calming presence in the chaos. Meanwhile, Sheriff Daniels wrestled with the weight of it all. The case took a toll on him, one that would linger like a shadow. Despite the justice served, the lesson wasn't lost on him how quickly kindness could turn to spite, and how fragile life could be. He invested his own energy into the foundation alongside the community, aiming to mentor at-risk youths, sharing tools he'd learned through years on the force. Time drifted on, and seasons changed, marking the passage of healing through shared grief and resilience. The park where Ellen had once spent countless hours became a space of renewal, a place of laughter, gatherings, and a poignant reminder of an unwavering spirit. As the years progressed, her story transformed into an anthem for others, whispers of hope weaving through the fabric of the town. The community learned to stand together amidst adversity, ensuring Ellen's legacy would shine on. A reminder that even in darkness, light could prevail with love, understanding, and collective strength. And though the shadow of Ellen's absence would always linger, it became a catalyst for mending a narrative that, while born from tragedy, evolved into something far greater. A bond that none could sever, and a future that glimmered with possibility. Reflection. Seasons turned once again, and the small town of Maplewood found solace in its resilience. Time had a way of sewing together the frayed edges left by trauma, but the scent of cinnamon and pine that wafted through the streets during the holidays also stirred memories. For those who had loved Ellen, her absence was palpable, a bittersweet echo that never vanished entirely. Sheriff Daniels stood atop the steps of the community center one snowy afternoon, watching children laugh as they played nearby. He felt the warmth of hope among them, a sensation as comforting as the hot cocoa offered during the holiday events Ellen had once organized. It reminded him of her boundless spirit, a reminder that vulnerability often intertwines with strength. The annual memorial dinner for Ellen had become a cherished tradition, an occasion that gathered old friends and new faces alike. It allowed for moments of reflection, laughter, and the sharing of stories. Some recounted her grace, while others spoke of her tenacity, fostering conversations that inspired the same resilience she had modeled for so many. As he listened, Daniels became acutely aware that healing didn't mean forget. Instead, it meant embracing the lessons imparted by loss, the understanding that life is a fragile tapestry interwoven with kindness, struggle, and healing. In the eyes of the youth he mentored through the foundation, Daniels saw glimmers of hope, inklings of purpose where once there had been despair. Jerry Matthews, now serving his sentence, wrote letters filled with thoughts of redemption and new beginnings. It struck Daniels that even those who stumble can still emerge transformed if given the right guide. With each passing day, Maplewood became a testament to the spirit of community forged in tragedy. Ellen's legacy was one of love and impact, long-lasting enough to unite hearts and serve as a beacon of strength for those navigating their own struggle. Through reflection, the town learned that while life may bend and break, it can also be resilient, stitched together with threads of compassion and a shared promise to continue moving forward.